Cloudcast Media.
Drew Schlosberg Spotlight on the Community Show, amplifying the voices of social impact organizations, entrepreneurs, local nonprofits, and other community champions who shape the culture, creativity, and connectivity of San Diego. Brought to you by Mission Fed Credit Union, bringing good things to San Diego for over 60 years. Learn more about what is good for you and good for all by visiting www.missionfed.com.
I'm Drew Schlosberg of Cloudcast Media. We are so pleased to have a return appearance from this group talking about one of the more critical topics and issues in our county, in our region, in our state, in our country, and in the world, and that is mental health. We have Steve Lim, licensed clinical social worker for the Palomar Family Counseling Service. How you doing, Steve?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing fine. How long have you been with Palomar?
Actually, I'm about to hit my 1 year. I'm relatively new. Took a whole different route to get to where I am. Moved down to San Diego just recently, actually, within the last 3 years or so.
Nice.
Okay, I guess it's been a little longer than I thought it was.
Yeah. What got you into the field?
Actually, I think I've always kind of known I wanted to do this. Ever since, I want to say like junior high school, I've known I wanted to be in the mental health field.
Interesting.
And so it's been a kind of a direct / roundabout way to get here. But
was there any like an epiphany? There was something that was going on at junior high and high school that said, you know what, there's a need for this and so forth?
Yeah, actually, for me, it really kind of came down to using my own lived experiences to really just find myself wanting to do something for the community and for people. I know for myself, during high school, I really found myself kind of struggling with my own mental health challenges.
Right.
And it was from the kindness of others that I was able to kind of get through that. And so to be able to give back in that way and be that person for others has really been one of my my big missions in life.
Yeah, and I think when we were talking to your colleagues before, we know there is an amazing shortage in mental health professionals. They're so needed. I'm preaching to the congregation. You know that better than anybody in this area. But the numbers are just staggering on how short. I hear numbers as 10,000, 12,000 or so. That's pretty accurate, is it not?
Yeah, I'd say it is. I know especially during the pandemic, there was a really big need for mental health services, and like access became a really big issue. I was actually a clinician at the time at the community college up in Ventura. And one of the things we found was just there were so many people who just lost all their support during the pandemic. And so it was, how do we bridge that? How do we connect with these? I know at the college, they ended up losing a good like third of their students to just lost contact with them. And so it was like, how do we get back into contact with these? How do we support the people? And so I think that's really what got that dialogue started.
Right. And one of the things I'm impressed with you folks, you work with a lot of the schools, correct? And K-12 schools, correct?
Yes, K-12. The program I'm in is specifically at the Vista Unified School District's middle schools and a couple of the elementary schools. And it's just such a need. I'm in the preventative care program.
It's huge. It is absolutely huge, and not just at Vista Unified, the other 42 school districts as well, you know, in this area. You guys concentrate mainly up in North County?
Yes.
Okay. And, you know, is there groups that you work with that do things countywide? I know you've one of the things that I always am impressed with the mental health world is that we're all in this together, and it's not a competition. It's how do we get people, back, healthy in that space. Who else do you work with?
We work with like pretty much all the different programs that are in the for my program in the middle schools. We're trying to get in contact with all the different programs that are servicing the same schools and just trying to work together to address the need with whichever program we feel like is going to be the best fit. I find that part so helpful because no matter how many services there are, if people don't know how to get to those services or which services are right for them, it kind of just defeats the purpose.
100%. And we'll talk about that as well, getting to the website. So, listen, we could spend 15 hours, probably 15 days for that matter, talking about the causes of why we are in this. Neil mentioned the pandemic. That certainly didn't help. Talk about social media. You can talk isolation, everything that goes, with this. San Diego isn't the most inexpensive place to live. I'm sure that contributes to it, maybe not necessarily to a middle school student, but maybe to the parent of a middle school student in this aspect as well. So, talk a little bit about emerging adulthood and how that ties into what you do.
Yeah. So emerging adulthood is kind of, I know back in the days of when I was in school, we talked a lot about emerging adulthood being something that's very specific to the United States because there's so much support up until after high school when parents go, where the kids go off on their own and they lose their connection to their parents really, or they try to like branch outward, so to speak. And so with emerging adulthood, it's kind of that time for a child to figure out themselves. And it's this really distinct period of self-discovery and self-understanding, especially kind of working with that college age, young adult population. You see a lot of that where it's trying to figure out their own motivations, separating them out. And back in the day before our kind of modern society, that was something that happened in our teens, but we're finding more and more that that's happening later and later as we find it hard to move out of our parents' place.
Right. Well, and there are reasons for that. Obviously we're talking about economics to say the least, and maybe some other factors with that as well. We're chatting with Steve Lim. He's the licensed clinical social worker for the Palomar Family Counseling Service. I'm Drew Schlosberg of Cloudcast Media, listening to another edition of Drew Schlosberg's Spotlight on the Community show. We're brought to you by Mission Fed Credit Union for 6 decades, just doing great things for people living in San Diego County. We've had a lot of health professionals on our show. One of our favorites is Jean McAllister. I'm not sure if you know Jean from the McAllister Institute. She's 90 plus years young herself. She has been clean and sober for I think she's in her 60th year now of doing this. But she talks about substance abuse, and we talk about the kids. She says, tragically, that number is not going down. Talk about that.
Yeah, I think substance use has been kind of like a way that people have found to try to cope with that's generally, I don't want to say accepted, but kind of is accepted by the community as a normalized way to cope. And we're finding that more and more in the middle schools, especially as we're introduced to new stressors, kind of tying in with that sense of belonging. Middle school is kind of that time to explore that. It's really where we start to understand those different social dynamics, and there's a lot of stress with that.
Right.
I remember in one of my early experiences in this field, there was a child who was just like, I don't understand what I'm supposed to do. If I do something too much, that's not okay. If I don't do it enough, that's not okay. And what?
Right. Well, and I think there's so many different influences. I'm a lot older than you, quite obviously. And even, I'm sure I've changed a lot since you were, in youth and all that business, and certainly talking about all the different platforms and so forth in this that we just didn't have access before. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it depends on how you use it. Now, you had mentioned something, you do a lot of preventative mental health, correct?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Preventive mental health is kind of trying to support students, clients, whatever,
right,
before they ever reach the point of really like needing the services,
right,
or really before they hit crisis. And I think that's such an important part of mental health, is that oftentimes we see people when they're already at their worst.
So more reactive than proactive.
Yeah. So preventative is really the kind of trying to take that proactive approach and how to do that. In fact, before I got licensed, I was in a doctoral program, and that was really the area of my focus, was preventative care and how do we provide preventative care and what that even looks like. Because part of care and mental health is so personalized, it's really individualized. And so when we're trying to come up with like a method to really study preventative programs, it's like, well, how can we take something where it's like we're trying to identify these protective factors, these things that are going to help the people, and how can we cater some kind of program or some kind of curriculum or whatever to really be able to address that need. And honestly, that's such a hard question. So much of the literature points at, hey, this person could benefit from something that's unique for them, but that doesn't work for this other person or this other age group or this other population.
Right. And so you're 100% correct. Then you get into privacy issues and you get people thinking, don't tell me what to do. We're in that era, right? No, we're trying to help you. Are you kidding me on this? And, my background is communication. I worked for the newspaper for a zillion years, even though I was on the business side, former journalist, but I was fascinated by communication, especially when it comes to mental health, because some of this is we just don't communicate well. Either we don't listen, we think we are listening, we're actually hearing, but we're not listening. But talk about how important that is, and whatever age groups you can deal with. You deal with the middle school kids, so 6 through 8, I imagine you're talking about. What is that age? 11 to 13 or whatever, give or take in between it. When you go in and you talk to do you talk to a class or you talk to individuals?
I do small groups, so a group of kids, but mostly individuals is where I find
And so what do you talk to them about mental health? What do you say?
Most of the time it's kind of, especially since I'm in a preventive program, it's really kind of reframing this idea of mental health means there's something wrong with you too. Mental health is about supporting you so that you can live your best version of yourself, so that you can be yourself and feel great in that, whatever that might mean.
Right. So give me an example. What would you say to some of the kids?
Yeah. So I'd really kind of just say, hey, part of this program is really just meant to support you so that you can figure out what works for you, what doesn't work for you. This is really about you being able to be yourself and express yourself in a way that others can hear you and can accept you. Because so much of what we're looking for is to be accepted.
Right. So when we come back from break, I want to talk about how those students you work with are chosen. And is it the school saying, hey, here's a group that you should be working with? Think about, do you work with the parents of those students as well? Or is it just that you're working with a student and that's it? Talk about that aspect as well. And then, Steve, we always leave time at the second half of our Spotlight interviews to ask our listeners, what can we do to support the great work that you're doing and your company's doing? When we return with Steve Lim, licensed clinical social worker from the Palomar Family Counseling Service, I'm Drew Schlosberg. Cloudcast Media, listening to another edition of Drew Schlosberg Spotlight on the Community Show, brought to you by Mission Fed Credit Union. We're broadcasting from the cool Mission Fed studios here in Scripps Ranch. We will be right back.
When you do your banking with Mission Fed, you get great rates on auto and home loans. That's good for you, but something good also happens for a lot of other people. We're not for profit, so we put money back into the community to help lots of great nonprofits to keep San Diego strong. So you're not just getting something good, you're doing something good. Come to Mission Fed. It's banking that's good for all.
Brand amplification is the DNA of Cloudcast Media, and our code is the powerful blending of sound, voice, and storytelling to lift local brands and their communities. Whether it is our Brandcast, Schoolcast, or Causecast platforms, the unifying ethos is all about this community, the one you call home. If you dare to dream and want to explore the brand amplification of Cloudcast, a national leader in local podcasting and other Winfluence strategies, please visit us at cloudcast.us.
I'm Drew Schlosberg of Cloudcast Media. You're listening to another edition of Drew Schlosberg Spotlight on the Community Show, the nation's longest running community podcast. We're now in our 18th year and brought to you by Mission Fed Credit Union. It's continuing to do great things in San Diego County for more than 6 decades in fields such as food insecurity and literacy and art and you name it. They're involved in it. Honored to have in the studio with us today, Steve Lim. He is the licensed clinical social worker for Palomar Family Counseling Service. Steve, we were talking right before the break. You work with groups of kids. Your focus is preventative in the Vista Unified School District. And how do the kids come to you? Is it the principal that sets this up? Is it the school counselor and says, here's a group of kids to work with?
Yeah, so we try to get students in a couple of ways. There's kind of self-referred, there's school-referred, and then we also use a evidence-based screening tool, and just the whole program is really evidence-based, but we use MySabers as a way to identify students who are experiencing challenges in the social and emotional areas of learning, and we kind of just reach out to the parents, to the students, to see if they're interested in enrolling in groups. So it's all voluntary, and it's all provided on campus, so there's not that extra barrier of trying to find transportation or trying to find time, because that can honestly be one of the biggest barriers to care.
Yeah, one of the organizations I work with, Classroom of the Future Foundation, works with all 43 school districts, focusing on career and college expectations and what's the workforce going to look like and everything in between. And of course, you can't help but when you talk to your colleagues in the 43 districts, not hear the word SEL every 3 seconds, right? Social emotional learning. Is that some of the work you're working with when it comes to a district?
Yeah, so we're totally kind of targeting that social emotional piece, because that is such a developmentally important part of that age range of kind of targeting how can we provide support so that, again, that student can be themselves and really kind of learn about some of the social and emotional challenges that come up. Middle school is that time where brain development really starts to start, and that critical thinking starts to develop, and it's just a whole new world of, well, if Sally thinks I'm blank, what does that mean about me?
Right. So, and I'm not sure what the numbers are, but they're big. When it looks like you are working with the kids, and how many people would you say, I guess crisis is in the eye of the beholder when it comes to mental health in this aspect, but we know it's growing. Would you say that the percentages keeps on growing up? It's not going down?
I would say, yeah, probably. I think especially as we kind of develop more access to resources to the internet, really, that there's more and more of that dialogue. And so even if it's not actually going up, I think people are more aware of these challenges. And so there's much more of that dialogue and that awareness of hey, maybe what I'm experiencing is something that I need to address.
Yeah, and I think with anything, especially, I told you how much I'm passionate about it. Communication, half the battle is making people aware of what's out there, like the services that you folks offer and so forth in this area. Do you ever work with the students on a one-on-one basis?
Yeah, so Palomar does offer individual clinical, and we also kind of within the schools try to connect students with appropriate resources, whether they have insurance or not.
Right.
I know Palomar offers sliding scale. In fact, I'm about to start doing that as well.
Okay.
To do clinical work so that we can kind of address things in an individual. The nice thing about kind of these groups is that it's a step in to receiving more services. So even if we identify them as that preventative level tier 2, we're also keeping a watch to see are there tier 3 concerns? Because one of the big concerns with these preventative services, what students fall through the cracks. That's been a really big dialogue of how do we catch them, and what are the risk factors that people aren't noticing because day to day externally they present as being okay.
Right, exactly. And, somebody, let's say it's an individual you met with now and said they can certainly, have another session with us. And now it's going to be 8 months till you do it just because of the, amount of work you folks have and, sort of the shortage of practitioners in that area. That's an issue, is it not?
Yeah. I think that's kind of also why preventive care is so important is because, sometimes that wait time can be incredibly long. And then it's those students, those clients who present as, oh, I'm okay, or I have my stuff together.
Right.
And then turns out that's just what they're externally presenting, but internally they could be really struggling. And so it's hard to catch that. And especially when the wait time is so long. I know back when I was at the college, especially, and I was doing individual sessions, I had some students who would come in one week, have a crisis, and then I wouldn't be able to see them again for a month. And between that month, like there were 4 crises that happened that they had no support for.
Right, exactly. How much do you work with the parents of these students?
So a part of the program is really trying to address the parent piece too, because especially with adolescents, a big part of it is parent involvement. How can the parent also support everything that we're learning?
Right.
And so that's a part of this program that's really been we've been trying to address and develop more is what can parents do to also support their students?
Right, exactly. And how much do you work with the faculty and the schools themselves?
I think the faculty is probably one of the biggest pieces of this whole program because they're the ones who are spending the time. They're the ones that are seeing some of these behaviors, and they're they're the experts of these students, second to their parents. And so they're kind of the people who help us identify those students who might not show up on My Savers, that might not show up on any kind of scale that we have, where we can notice these things where it's like, sure, they're coping. And especially during middle school, one of the big self-report is kind of a challenge because what student's going to say, oh, I'm really having a hard time when their buddy's right next to them.
Right. Well, that could be at any grade for that matter, even young adults and even older adults for that matter. Again, we're chatting with Steve Lim, a licensed clinical social worker for Palomar Family Counseling Service. I'm Drew Schlosberg of Cloudcast Media, listening to another edition of Drew Schlosberg Spotlight on the Community Show, brought to you by Mission Fed Credit Union. 60 years just doing great things. People in San Diego, County, So, on that vein, what can our listeners do to help support your efforts?
I think the biggest thing that we can do is kind of just, gosh, that's actually a hard one.
One, I think anything, and I'll sort of answer it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this thing here. Listen, if you see, either your child or your child's friend or whatever, don't ask you to get your PhD in some, psychology at this point, but if you see there's some stress, probably reach out to somebody, let somebody know, and I think, I've said this ever since the show started in 2007. I hope I live long enough where mental health is not a stigma. And I think all the practitioners like you go, from your lips to God's ear, right, on this stuff. But we are making some progress, are we not?
Yeah, I think we're definitely making some progress. I think the sooner we kind of have that dialogue is the sooner that someone can be identified for receiving that support. And it's really sometimes just reaching out and lending a listening ear to recognize like, hey, someone who may not seem like they're struggling could actually be struggling. And just being open to that is such an important part that any real person can do for their loved ones.
Do you have on the site anywhere that here's some warning signs, parents, you may want to look at, and doesn't mean they're actually 100% foolproof on it, but if your child who was used to be very gregarious and talkative is now seems to be very subdued or whatever the case may be, do you have hints on those things at all?
I think it can go both ways. So there's those people who will start to like change in behavior, isolate. Yeah. There's also the people who will kind of do the opposite, who will become kind of just different from their normal personality. I think any significant change in behaviors from what we see as normal can be an early warning sign for something's going on. People react to things in so many different ways that it's really just kind of recognizing those deviations and not normalizing them as, oh, they're just being X, Y, and Z, and really also kind of taking that critical eye to say, is this something that's maybe something's going on that we're not aware of?
Do you find that the middle school students that, you hear this all the time, well, it's much easier to talk to someone like Steve than it is my parents or my brother or sister. I mean, you probably can see that through all ages and all that business in that area of it. But with middle school students, you find it that it's easier for them to talk to someone like you than it is maybe their parents?
I'd like to think so. I think for middle school students specifically, it's really hard to talk because there's so much of that social judgment piece that's going on internally of like, what are people going to think? I know sometimes we jokingly say like middle school, nothing's good for them. But to an extent, it's really kind of like they're dealing with such internalized judgment for themselves from their peers that it's really hard for someone to open up in that environment. And I think that's just one of the challenges that really come up during that middle school age.
Right. Yeah. Without question. What advice do you give then? We've heard enough about, my goodness, people are on TikTok or they're on Instagram or they're on fill in the blank, probably 75 other apps I'm not even aware of, in an extraordinary amount of time. It used to be back in the day when you'd be critical of the kids in front of the TV for 7 hours a day. Are you kidding me? Now I think it's gravitated from the TV to social media, correct?
Yes. Definitely social media has played a big piece, both in a good way and in a bad way.
Correct.
We have so much exposure to social media as a way to gain clout, to become popular, but it's also social media has also improved the awareness of mental health challenges.
Yeah.
And I think a big term for that that's really thrown around is how someone should be or what should be considered normal.
Right.
And it's really that should piece that can be such a challenge with that increased exposure. It's we have so much more kind of visibility of how other people are living, and then we use that comparison.
Yeah. Well, and we know this, and I'm sure you've seen it on Netflix. I've talked about it, the social dilemma. In my opinion, it's a pretty good piece about some of the folks that were on the ground floor of Facebook and all that business, and talk about what have we unleashed, for God's sake, on this. There almost needs to be some safeguards on those things. And I know, if I'm not mistaken, I just heard that Brazil is outlawing X or something like that. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, I think I saw that too. It's
Are you kidding me? The whole country? I was talking to a buddy of mine who happened to be Brazilian, and he just shook his head and said, "Are you kidding me on this?" What advice, would you give in this, world? It's just like you said, pay attention, see if there's any changes. What else can people do?
I think media literacy is such an important part of this, and really being kind of critical towards that, because social media, so much of it is about gaining traction, about gaining visibility. And so oftentimes the things that we're exposed to are the very, is what's getting people to click. So we see a lot of that absurdity in social media just because that's what gets views. It's almost like being able to live vicariously through someone else's, what would normally not be considered maybe socially accepted antics.
Right.
And so being critical of what's being exposed to and what we're seeing as being defined as this is what a middle schooler's life should be like.
Right. So, we brought this up to your colleagues as well, obviously it's a field you're very passionate about. You had your epiphany, I guess, when you were in middle school, that you wanted to become a mental health professional in this area. Certainly there's a big shortage of those. It's a great field to be in, is it not?
It is. I think there's just so much that I can kind of just experience in the field and see happening. And honestly, I find it really rewarding to kind of be able to be there and support the people who I end up working with.
So not to put you on the spot here, but if our listeners saying, listen, this is something I think that could be very helpful, like Steve figured out when he was in middle school, if they wanted to reach out to you and say, hey, I want to learn more about the profession, can they do that? Yeah,
I'm absolutely open to that. Part of the thing I love doing is being able to support the next generation. Even in my doctoral program, I ended up being a mentor to the people who are coming in the year after me, and just really kind of supporting their growth.
Great. What's your? Do you have an email we can put on the air?
Yeah, you can use my my Palomar email. So slim@pfc.agency.
Well, really appreciate you coming in. This is something that is so critical. We love having mental health experts like you talking about this. We can't talk about it enough. And I know somewhere down the road we'll have you or your colleagues back in and just talking about other new things that you folks are doing in the field.
Sounds good.
Very good. Steve Lim is a licensed clinical social worker for Palomar Family Counseling Service. I'm Drew Schlosberg. You've been listening to another edition of Drew Schlosberg's Spotlight on the Community Show. We are the nation's longest-running community podcast, now in our 18th year. Brought to you by the very, very cool folks of Mission Fed Credit Union for 6 decades, doing great things. For anyone living in San Diego County, we hope you enjoyed the interview.
You've been listening to an episode of Drew Schlosberg's Spotlight on the Community Show. amplifying the voices of social impact organizations, entrepreneurs, local nonprofits, and other community champions who shape the culture, creativity, and connectivity of San Diego community. Brought to you by Mission Fed Credit Union, bringing good things to San Diego for over 60 years. Learn more about what is good for you and good for all by visiting www.missionfed.com.
Cloudcast Media.